I've been doing quite a few videos on webcams, and a little while ago, I talked about one of EMEET's cameras that was really nice and affordable, inexpensive, and it was a great entry option. Well, since then, they've sent me over their Pixy, which is a dual camera 4K gimbal webcam, and we're gonna go ahead, check this thing out. We're gonna do the usual. We'll get it unboxed, we'll get it set up, we'll take a look at the software, we'll take a look at its quality in a bunch of different situations. We'll also compare it to a few of the other web cameras that I have that are very similar with the multi-axis gimbal, and we'll talk about the pricing and if I feel like it's a really good option. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the unboxing. All right, so here we have the box. On the front, we see it's a dual camera PTZ 4K webcam. They mention AI powered and intelligent tracking. The AI that they advertise here does a few things, which is very different from some of the other cameras. So we'll talk about that later once we get into the software. This is what the camera looks like. So kind of cool. It has the dual lens. So one lens is the actual video sensor lens, and then the other one is used for the AI tracking, the AI focus, and all that stuff. On the side here, it just mentions those lenses that I talked about. So the one lens on the left is the image sensor. The one on the right is for the AI algorithm camera. 2-axis gimbal, 3 microphone array, and it has gesture controls. And then we just have some model information here, and that's pretty much it. It just tells us what's in the box here. So let's go ahead and get this open. All right, so we're welcomed with a nice little card here. Introduction video, FAQ, and the actual software download. So we'll get that going. We got a box here, and then we have our camera. So comes in like a plasticky paper little film here. And quality feels pretty good. It feels like a mix of metal and plastic. It's got some weight to it, but we do have a this looks wise, it looks a little bit more similar to the OBSBOT Tiny 2 Lite in terms of just the overall shape and everything. But it's more rounded, a lot more circular in general, so that's kind of cool. And then we have the little mount here. So this is all metal. It's actually really, really heavy. All metal. Screws into the bottom, so unlike the other cameras that use magnets, this one uses a screw. And very heavy duty kind of feeling, so that's nice. And I think that's it for what's in the box. And then we have here a little box on the side. So we've got some more manuals. We've got a full manual with multiple languages in there. Kind of gives us a little bit of a quick guide on how to use things, so that's cool. And then we have a pretty long USB-C cable with a USB-C to USB-A adapter in case you need it. So in terms of the specs, the EMEET Pixy does video resolutions of 4K 30 frames per second or 1080p 60 frames per second as its maximums. It also does many more resolutions below that. The aperture is listed at an f1.8. It has an FOV of 73 degrees. The privacy is a mode where the camera points downwards and shuts itself off. There's no hard aperture or anything that closes to block the camera. It is a 2-axis non-removable gimbal. It supports gestures. The focus type is using that dual camera system in order to do its focus. It does not support HDR, and it has a triple mic array with AI noise cancellation. So if you would like to support the channel, there will be affiliate links down in the description below if you're interested in picking up the EMEET Pixy for yourself. I will have both an Amazon and an EMEET store link there for you. You can also support the channel by subscribing and hitting that like button. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, so here we have the camera. It's doing a little bit of flickering right now. We're at 4K 30 frames per second, and it seems to be flickering a little bit in terms of white balance. So in the software, I'm gonna go ahead and change this to maybe turn off the auto exposure. Yeah, so the auto exposure was causing flickering. Maybe it's because of the window that I have here. But if I turn that off, it seems to be doing okay. Turn that back on and it starts flickering. So we're gonna leave it off for now. We'll go through the software in a second. I just wanted to kind of look at the camera in general, see how it looks. We're gonna go ahead and test the microphone and everything afterwards. But this is how the webcam looks with everything on default other than the auto exposure turned off right now. So it does seem to be a little bit bright. It is overexposing my head a little bit, which has been a common issue with almost all the webcams. It's because I'm bald. I'm in a white room. I've got natural light coming in from the window here, and then I have two large LED panels in front of me and behind me. So if I drop the auto exposure a little bit, one down, which is -6, seems a little bit dark. Going back to -5, it seems a little bit bright. And this is with the ISO set to 0. If I drop the brightness at all, seems a little bit better, actually. So now there's not as much blowing out on my head. The wall doesn't seem very blown out. So I think this is a little bit better. So, I mean, overall, it seems to look pretty good. Let's go ahead and test its focus performance. This one is something that all of the cameras have seemed to do quite a bit differently on. So I have my little Bowser, and if we go ahead and put that close, it pulls focus pretty quick. Pulls it right off my face, put my face right back into focus when I pull this down, put this back up. It's back in focus. Pull it down. Once we go into the software, we'll see if we can adjust the way that focus works at all, but the focus seems to be working pretty well. That one was a little bit slower now that I don't have the second hand up, because it will likely be focusing on my face over anything, and because his face is kind of hidden, probably makes it a little bit more difficult for the camera. But overall, I think it's doing a pretty decent job switching that focus over. Now let's quickly do a few different lighting situations. I'm going to leave the settings as is. So the brightness is at 108. That's the only thing that I changed. And the auto exposure is set to -5. Everything else is set to the defaults. So 128 contrast, 0 ISO, 128 sharpness, 128 saturation, 128 tone. And the auto white balance is set to automatic. And yeah, everything else is as it was normally. So let's go ahead and turn off these lights and just have the natural light coming in from the side. So what I'm going to do for this, because now it's really dark, I'm going to turn the brightness back to the default and the auto exposure. And now this is how we end up looking here. So this actually looks pretty decent. This is very passable. I think it looks pretty good. If I was on like a video call or some kind of Teams meeting or something, I think this would look great. It looks good. There does seem to be a little bit of like artifacting a little bit in the back here. You could just see some slight jagged edges in the Mandalorian helmet here. But overall, I think the quality looks pretty good. You could see a little bit of jaggedness on top of my head too. I'm not sure why that is. It might just be the sharpening. The sharpening by default is at 128. If I drop it all the way down to 0, that does seem to go down a little bit. You just get a little bit of pixelization, but now the jaggedness seems to be gone. So that's something to keep in mind. There is a little bit of noise on the white wall here. Again, we are in a darker room than normal, so that is something to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and turn on an overhead light. That's not ideal. It's going to present a lot of shadows on my face, but we'll see how that looks as well. All right, here we have a overhead light. This is probably what a lot of people look like in their work meetings and stuff. They'll have a light on in the room. They'll have some natural light from some kind of window or something, and this is the way it looks. Honestly, it doesn't look too bad. The contrast and the range right now actually doesn't look too harsh. The shadows on my face and stuff aren't too bad. The brightness on my head isn't blowing out or anything. So I think this looks pretty good. The noise on the wall has reduced quite a bit as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go and use this with the kind of lighting setup that I normally use for my streams, which is basically all the lights off. Going to go ahead and close the blinds here so that it's full blackout. And then I have some backlights that I end up using. All right, so this is what the lighting looks like with my stream setup light. So I have a light kind of back here. I have this Decala light here, and then I have a lamp up top there with a RGB bulb in there. Overall, it doesn't look terrible. The noise on the wall is definitely getting bad, but all of the cameras kind of suffer from that quite a bit, so that's nothing overly surprising. I have all the settings again still set to the automatic. I haven't locked anything off like I did with the studio lights on. And this lighting is passable. I don't think it looks bad. I don't think it looks great. There's quite a bit of noise in the image here, but I am putting it in a really difficult situation in terms of the sensor really kind of struggling to get some good light in there. So I don't think this looks bad. I think some of the other cameras do look a little bit better. And once we get to the camera comparisons, we're going to put all three cameras through the same lighting scenario. So we're going to do the studio lights, we'll do the natural outside light, we'll do the top down light, and then we'll do this kind of lighting setup, and we'll see how it all looks. But next thing we're going to go ahead and test is this microphone. All right, so this is the microphone on the Pixy. I had to bring down the levels. I did a minus 7.4 decibels on there to make it so that it wasn't blowing out because it was pretty loud. And we're currently using the live mode. Now, unfortunately, the software doesn't really tell you what each of these modes does. I'm going to assume that the live mode tries to isolate my voice a little bit, but doesn't do too much heavy noise cancellation. The noise canceling mode is going to use that AI noise cancellation to try to reduce as much background noise. And then original sound mode, I'm assuming, is going to be no processing whatsoever. It's just going to be the straight microphone. So this is what the live mode sounds like. Let's go ahead and do some clapping, see how well it gets rid of that. So this is us clapping while the noise cancellation mode is on. Sorry, is not on. And now we go to the noise canceling mode. This is what the noise canceling mode sounds like. Again, my room is not great for microphones in general, especially omnidirectional microphones. We're right up against drywall, right behind the monitor here and behind all the webcams. So that's something to keep in mind, but this is what the noise canceling mode sounds like. Let's go ahead and do the clapping test again. And we'll see if you can hear my voice over the clapping or not. And finally here we have the original sound mode. I haven't adjusted the metering or anything at all across all of these. It does seem like the original sound mode is a little bit quieter than the other ones. Let me know if you think that sounds like that. But this is the way it's currently sounding. And I'm going to go ahead and take a listen to these and see how it sounds to myself. Okay, so now we're in the software here. And let's quickly go through how all this works, what I think about the software in general. Then we're going to go ahead and test the tracking, and then we're going to go and compare it to some of the other cameras. So this is the main page of the software. We are currently using the webcam preview within the software instead of it going through OBS. And right now there are three different modes. There's standard mode, which is it not tracking me whatsoever. There's a tracking mode, which you can either toggle using this or you can toggle it using gestures. And then we have a privacy mode that just turns off the webcam and the microphone. So if I go ahead and turn on the privacy mode, it's just going to display this privacy mode here, and the microphone is just not going to be operating. If we go into the audio here, we'll see that there is no audio microphone coming through. If I go ahead and change this back to standard mode, now if I'm talking, you can see that there's audio coming through the microphone. So the audio will automatically be muted when it's on privacy mode. And this is something to talk about as well, is that they do have this mixing feature. So you can go ahead and mix in other bits of audio into your audio mix for when you're doing your recordings. So that's pretty interesting. And it mentions it here, the audio is only used in the audio recording or the virtual camera scenario. So relatively interesting here. And you can also just have it so that it's single, so that it's only going to be using the one microphone here. And this is where we were changing those audio modes in the previous section here, so that's something to keep in mind. The zooming is unavailable at 4K 30 frames per second, so any of the 4K resolutions, and then at the 1080p 60 frames per second. If we drop this down to 1080p 30, then I can go ahead and use the digital zoom, which seems a little bit odd. I'm not a big fan of that. All of the other cameras were able to zoom no matter what, and it's a digital zoom, so you would want to do a digital zoom at the higher resolution because there's more pixels there, and it'll look a little bit less pixelated when you're doing that digital zoom. So very interesting that they chose to do that. Maybe that is something that they can update in the future. That will be something to keep in mind. And we have device is currently in normal mode, and that's the only option there. And we have the ability to turn on and off the preview and to mute the microphone or not. Now, if we go into the effects, this is where I was going ahead and adjusting some of the settings here. So I set the settings back to kind of what I had at the beginning of the video when I adjusted it. So I turned the auto exposure off and the brightness is set to 100. If I go back to the default, which is that stuff on, we're really bright. The flickering is not happening anymore, which is great, but we are really, really bright. My face is like kind of blown out, kind of a little bit crazy. So that's why I was using that customize, but we have a default, we have a bright setting, which is even brighter, really blowing things out. We have something called nostalgia, which is just adding a white balance of 7,500 and just kind of putting the Mexico filter on. We've got blues, which is just going to do, I assume, more blue light. So it's going to go a little bit closer to the blue in terms of white balance. Everything else is kind of in the middle. We have cold, which is probably going even more so over. This sharpening is looking terrible. You can see the pixelization around my eyes. And vivid looks really blown out. It looks very similar to the bright. They look very close. And then, like I mentioned, I have it here on the custom, and I have the sharpness turned all the way down just because the processing on the sharpness just didn't look great. We go ahead and turn that up. I do get a little bit clear, but then there is also a little bit of pixelization. But oddly, I do seem to be a little bit out of focus. So that is something to keep in mind as well. And we have the auto white balance on there. You can also flip vertically and horizontally. If you want, you can use this webcam in a portrait setup. You will have to have some kind of tripod or something to be able to put the camera into a portrait orientation. And then it should automatically notice it. And then if not, you can go ahead and use these buttons to flip it. So that's cool. Then if we go into the assistants here, we have the focus style. So we have a center focus, we have a face focus, and then we have a selected area focus. So I can go ahead and select an area and it should focus on that instead of my face. So that's actually pretty cool. Worked really, really quickly. I don't know if you can adjust the size. Doesn't seem like you can adjust the size of this. But it's kind of cool that you can set a manual focus location if you really wanted to. We'll put it back on my face focus. See how long it takes to pull on my face. Hello? Seems to really like the background now. Let's see if I put the focus area in the middle, back on my face, and then turn that off. That's better. So now we're back to focusing on my face. So that's cool. We can also manually just do the focus if we want to. So currently it is in the middle. If we go ahead and do far, it's going to focus on however far that background is trying to go. I don't know what the maximum focal length distance is. It isn't very fast, so you have to let go for it to change the focus. And you can get pretty far and pretty close, but it does seem like I can't get the background as focused, like right there with my face being a little bit out of focus. That's a pretty small window in terms of the level. So not a lot of play here, but it's really cool that you can just manually do the focus with that near and far. So I like that as well. And then they have an auto enter privacy mode. So if the camera is not currently being active as a source, whether within the software or within another piece of software like Teams or OBS, you can have it so that it'll automatically enter that privacy mode. And then the gesture control. So I have it turned off because I do talk a lot with my hands and I don't like the gestures automatically turning things on and off while I'm doing these videos. But the only gesture that this camera has available to it is being able to turn on and off the tracking. So if I go ahead and put my hand up here, it's going to flash a couple times. It is now turned into tracking mode. And if I go ahead and move, it will follow me around. If I go ahead and stand up, might be a little slow because I hurt my back. We can go ahead and stand up. It'll follow us around. Sorry about the camera in the way. And does a pretty good job tracking us. It's a little bit fast. And the other thing is that there is no adjustments to the way that this tracking works. So with the other two cameras, we were able to adjust the tracking speed, how quickly it moved around, how jerky it felt. There's no adjusting on EMEET, although eventually maybe in the future they'll add that into the software, but as of right now, that is not a feature that they have. But it does a pretty good job of keeping me in here, even if I move relatively quickly. It's doing a pretty good job of staying on me, so that's good. And if you're wondering what these filters here on the bottom, they're just really pulling over these effects on the side, so you can make your own, just one singular version, and then all those other ones that we saw in this drop down are all just here for quick access. So there also is a whiteboard mode and a desktop mode, although the desktop mode is not great at all. If I go ahead and enable that, it pointing the camera down actually looks pretty good, but as soon as it actually enables the desktop view, it is just stretching out the image like crazy. It looks pretty awful. It really flattens out the image, and I'm not a really big fan of that. You'd be better off just aiming the gimbal all the way down, like so, and maybe pointing your camera a little bit further down to get the angle that you want. I don't really suggest using that desktop mode. It did not look very good. We're gonna go ahead and put this back to my face. And then the whiteboard mode, I don't have a whiteboard, but if I had one on this wall here, it would go ahead and try to identify the whiteboard and go in there. I don't use this on any of the cameras, but all of the cameras do have this as an option, so there is that. And one of the final features in here is one of the AI features that they advertise, and it's called script generation. So you can go ahead and you can use multiple different language models. So Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, and Grok. And you can go ahead and storyboard something, and it will not only help you create a script, but it'll also create a bunch of shooting situations that you would want to use in there. So let's go ahead and say, let's create a video showing off a new webcam. We'll do shooting style universal. We will do content duration within 30 minutes. And let's go ahead and start composing. We'll use Gemini for this one. All right, so that didn't take overly long. And so it's creating a video shoot based on, let's see here. Maybe this is easier to look this way. No. So not easy to look at all the information here. I guess I have to download it to look at it better. Let's do that and see how the download looks, because I can't read any of the dialogue here. But as you can see, it does mention camera operation and shot scale. So that's kind of interesting. Go ahead and download. And if we go ahead and look at this now, so we can see most of the information. So it's shot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Living room day. So do shot scale. It randomly assigned a name Anna, so that's interesting. We can see the camera shots. We can see the screen that it's showing, so that's kind of cool. And then the dialogue. So this is really short dialogue for a 30-minute video. But I mean, a relatively interesting feature, I think. It's very interesting that it shows all this information and that you have this built into the camera. If you want to go ahead and try it out, it's cool. It's a tool that's kind of there for your use. I like the fact of using AI as a tool and not as a replacement for things. So using it as that tool to kind of maybe help you out with some ideas, not a bad idea. I don't know how useful the script generation is going to be for a lot of things. But I mean, if you want to try it, seems to work okay. I'm sure if we use the different language models, it might come out a little bit differently as well. Not something that I would personally use, but it is an interesting feature. All right, so here we have 4 cameras. So we have the EMEET Pixy, we have my A6400 with a Sigma 16mm lens on it. We have the OBSBOT Tiny 2 Lite, and then we have the Insta360 Link 2. So let me know which one you think is which. The A6400 is the only one running at 1080p, 60 frames per second though, and all the rest are running at 4K 30. So that one should be relatively obvious in terms of like my head movement and stuff. You should be able to kind of tell which one is which. But between the other 3 cameras, let me know if you can figure out which one it is. Just gonna go ahead and kind of move around a little bit and I will go ahead and now put the names of all the cameras on the screen here. So this is with the studio lights on. I'm going to go ahead and turn the lights off. I'm going to leave all the cameras on their auto modes. I believe they should all be on auto. I'm going to change the EMEET to audio when I go ahead and turn off the lights like I did before. We're going to see how well it ends up performing in terms of the different lighting scenarios compared to the other cameras. All right, so this is how all the cameras look like with the lights off. I'm not sure why the OBSBOT seems to be lagging a little bit. It doesn't seem to be enjoying OBS at the moment. So that's something to keep in mind. But overall, I think the EMEET is doing a decent job here. It doesn't seem to be struggling. It actually seems to be doing a pretty good job with the light compared to when the lights were on with the auto settings. So I actually think this looks quite good. So I'll bunch up the cameras a little bit closer to one another. And this is how we're looking. So overall, I think we're looking pretty decent. So this is how we look. Let's go ahead and turn that overhead light on. So with that overhead light, I think all of the cameras are actually doing an okay job. They're doing it a little bit differently from one another, but I do think they're all doing a decent job. The OBSBOT is a little bit darker, but I do believe that there is a negative exposure set there right now. I don't want to launch all of the webcam softwares, and because last time I did that, it ended up crashing them all. So this is how we're looking with the overhead light. Let's go ahead and do the streamlight situation. Okay, so this is how we look for the streamlight situation, and it is very apparent that the Pixy is struggling the most out of all the cameras right now. The noise on this wall is very active. You can even see it on the curtains here. It's very, very active. This camera definitely needs a lot more light than the other ones in order to look presentable. I don't think this looks presentable right now. The OBSBOT, I still think does the best out of the webcams, but my mirrorless camera is obviously doing a pretty good job of keeping everything nice and sharp, not putting too much noise in there, and looking pretty decent. Out of the webcams, I think the OBSBOT has the least amount of noise. But this is a pretty harsh lighting scenario for any kind of webcam. This is pretty extreme. This is just what I like to use when I'm playing my video games. I don't like having a lot of lights on. And this is kind of the way that I have it set up. But overall, this does show a price difference between the EMEET and the other cameras. Although the Link 2 is a more expensive camera and its dark performance seems to be a little bit less than the OBSBOT. I typically end up using the OBSBOT, but not the Tiny 2 Lite because I don't need the functionality of the movement as much. I use the EMEET 2, which is their static camera, as my main streaming webcam. And then I use the other cameras, especially the ones on the gimbal, so the Link 2 and the Tiny 2 Lite, as additional cameras during my stream. If I'm going to go ahead and do something else, I'm showing something on my desk, stuff like that, they're really helpful for that. But yeah, this is the lighting setup. All right, so now I have the tracking on for all of the cameras, other than obviously my A6400. And we're going to go ahead and see how the cameras compare in terms of my movement. So if I go ahead and stand up, you could tell that some of the cameras are a little bit more jerky than the others. So let's go ahead and do some movements. And we can see, I still think that the Link 2 has the smoothest movement overall. I think it looks really good. The EMEET is a little bit more choppy, but the OBSBOT is also relatively choppy right now as well. So that is something to keep in mind. The Link 2, Insta360 just does a lot more of the action-y stuff, and I think that's why their tracking is just really, really good. The EMEET isn't bad. The OBSBOT isn't bad, but it just, when compared to the Link 2, it's very, very noticeable. And unfortunately, on the EMEET, there's no adjustability here, so I can't even kind of play around with that. Whereas with OBSBOT and Link 2, at least I can kind of adjust the way that I want the tracking to work in terms of the speed. So with the Link 2, I can go ahead and track the speed between slow, medium, and fast. So I have it on the slowest setting right now because that keeps it the smoothest. With OBSBOT, I can go ahead and change how quickly the movement is as well. And they also have different types of tracking, whereas the EMEET just has And with the other cameras, I do have the ability to do different types of tracking. So I can do, super close on the head tracking. I can end up doing a torso tracking. I can end up doing full body tracking. They do auto framing plus the tracking. Whereas with the EMEET, you can just turn tracking on and off. There's none of those additional features. And that's kind of what you lose out at the lower price point. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about the spec comparisons between these three cameras and the pricing comparison between these three cameras. All right, so talking about the price, the EMEET Pixy is regular price $159.99. So overall, it is a pretty good price for a gimbal camera. But as we noticed, you are losing some features because of the lower price point. So the gimbal just does not have nearly as many features. The software doesn't have as much adjustability. The camera quality is severely lacking in the lower light situations, although it does pretty good in the better light. So do keep that in mind. But at $160, I think it is a relatively good deal depending on the lighting scenarios that you plan to use it for. Now, if we compare it to the OBSBOT Tiny 2 Lite, which is normally $180, so more expensive, but currently and relatively often is going on sale, currently cheaper than the EMEET Pixy at $149. The Tiny 2 Lite performs the best in the lower light situations. The tracking isn't nearly as good as the Link 2, but you do have a lot more tracking options than the EMEET Pixy. There's a lot more software functionality in the OBSBOT, and the OBSBOT has some really great integrations with things like a Stream Deck, which you can use to preset a whole bunch of positions and all this stuff like that. I really do like it. At the price point of an extra $20, I personally think that $20 is worth it if you will be using that extra functionality in the software, using the Stream Deck stuff, and maybe performing in some lower light situations. I really do like the OBSBOT Tiny 2 Lite. Now, if we compare it to the Insta360 Link 2, regular price $199.99, so an additional $40, but currently, again, on sale cheaper than the EMEET Pixy at the $149.99. This one definitely has the best overall tracking. I think the Link 2 is the best camera in terms of its tracking ability. The Tiny 2 Lite and the Link 2 kind of trade blows in terms of the actual sensor quality depending on the different lighting situations. In certain situations, the Link 2 looks better. In certain situations, the Tiny 2 looks better. So I really do think that the big difference is going to be the low light performance for the Tiny 2 and having that Stream Deck functionality, which I think is great. Whereas the Link 2 just has a better overall gimbal feature set. So not only does the gimbal look better and track better when you're moving around, but it does have way more features in terms of its tracking. So it has like pause points. Its desk view works fantastic, and I've used it for some of my Lego streams. It overall is a much better camera in terms of all those additional features. And at the current price, it is pretty good. At the normal price of being an extra $40 more than the EMEET Pixy, again, it really does go back to, do you need those extra features? Is that going to be worth it for you for the extra $40? For me personally, I end up using a lot of that stuff relatively often, so it is a little bit worth it for me. But if the EMEET Pixy does end up going on sale like these other two cameras and bringing its price down significantly more so that when these cameras are on sale, it's not more expensive than them, then I think that's where the EMEET Pixy might do a little bit better. But at the current price point and the fact that the Tiny 2 Lite and the Link 2 are often on sale around this $150 price point, it is a little bit harder to recommend the EMEET Pixy, especially when it's more expensive. Now, if we compare the specs of the three cameras, they all have the same video resolution specs of up to 4K 30 frames per second or the 1080p at 60 frames per second. They all have similar apertures. The Link 2 and the Pixy are f1.8, whereas the Tiny 2 Lite is an f2.0. Their FOVs are a little bit different, although they didn't look that different in the side-by-side comparisons. The Tiny 2 and the Link 2 are, the Tiny 2 Lite and the Link 2 are 79.5 and 79.4, so very similar, whereas the Pixy is 73. Now, they all use a very similar style for their privacy mode. They just point the camera downwards, turn the camera off. But the OBSBOT and the Link 2 have the ability for you to toggle whether or not the microphone is on or off in that privacy mode. Whereas on the Pixy, that does not seem to be an option that you can choose. Now, all of the cameras are on a 2-axis gimbal. The Link 2 and the EMEET have a removable base, whereas the OBSBOT, the base is built into the actual camera itself. So it's not a separate one like the Link 2 and the EMEET. They all have different types of... The Link 2 and the OBSBOT both use phase detection autofocus with a manual focus option, whereas the Pixy uses that dual camera autofocus with the manual focus. The Link 2 and the OBSBOT support HDR. The Link 2 supports it in all formats, whereas the Tiny 2 Lite only allows it within the virtual camera, and the EMEET does not support HDR whatsoever. And then the Link 2 had really impressive noise cancellation with its dual omnidirectional microphones. The Tiny 2 Lite has dual omnidirectional with standard noise reduction. And then the EMEET Pixy did have the noise reduction with a triple array microphone. Now, I will say that the EMEET Pixy and the Link 2, their noise cancellation are very similar to one another. They both performed extremely well on the full top of the level noise cancellation when I was clapping. Was not able to hear the clapping. It did adjust the way that my voice sounded quite a bit, but it was really, really impressive that it basically eliminates all that clapping right beside my face. So overall, relatively impressive with that. So to close things off, do I suggest the EMEET Pixy at the current price situation? Unfortunately, I do not. The Pixy is more expensive than the other two cameras, and those other two cameras provide a lot more features at that price point and being cheaper right now. At their regular price points, I think the EMEET Pixy does do a very good job of providing a lot of value. I really do hope that they can go ahead and look at the pricing situations, especially since the Link 2 and the Tiny 2 Lite are really quite often almost always on sale at those lower price points. I think both of those camera manufacturers took a look at how much things were costing and the pricing of a lot of other cameras and realized that maybe their cameras were a little bit too expensive. So they do have them on sale quite often. So I talked to EMEET about the pricing, and they mentioned they're going to try to do monthly promotions and bringing the EMEET Pixy down to $135.99. In addition to that, they're also going to be providing a coupon. If you use code Caddac, it'll get you an additional 6% off. So if you use that during the promotional period, it'll bring the price down to just under $128, which I think is a much more reasonable price. I think at that price, it's a really good option. You're ending up saving a decent amount of money. You're still ending up saving at $20. And if that $20 really matters to you and you do not need the additional low light performance of something like the OBSBOT Tiny 2, and you don't need the improved gimbal performance, moving really quickly around and stuff like that of the Link 2, then I think at that $128 price point, the EMEET Pixy does present itself as a much better value option. But that does mean you're going to have to wait for those sales and make sure that it is on those promotional sale times that you're going to pick up the product. I do think that EMEET does some things really, really well. I think the gimbal works. I don't like how snappy it is. I don't like that there's no adjustability for the gimbal. But I do think that the sensor has some great qualities to it. I don't think it looks significantly different than the other two cameras, except in that low light performance. But in the better light performance, like as of right now, I think it looks pretty good. I think overall the sharpness and stuff, I do like adjusting a lot of those settings, but you can get it to a situation where I think it looks pretty decent. Like right now we're using that camera and I think it looks really good. I think it looks better than your standard laptop camera. I think it looks better than your 1080p 60 camera that you might be buying, like a old Logitech or something like that. I think it looks pretty good. I just think that the software needs some more features and some more adjustability in order for it to perform better. And I think that if you're going to be using it in much better lighting scenarios than I have with my streaming setup, that the sensor looks fantastic. Now, the build quality is great. It is an easy camera to set up. It's an easy one to just toss in your bag and bring with you if you need to go somewhere. It is a little bit larger. It is slightly larger than the OBSBOT. It is a different shape than the Link 2. So it's a lot taller than the Link 2 is, but it is narrower overall. So that's something to keep in mind. I think the EMEET Pixy is a step in the right direction. I think the company is improving overall in terms of its quality and its products. but I do think that at the current price points, it's just not the best option. I really do hope that EMEET can take a look at the software and add a lot of that adjustability in there, because that will significantly change the way that I feel about it. Now, EMEET also brought some comments on the studio software, and they mentioned that they're going to be releasing a 2.0 version sometime in the coming months. If you've watched this channel for any long period of time, you'll know that I do not like suggesting products in terms of like the future and promises that the companies make in terms of software and stuff. But that is something to be aware of and keep an eye out for. Maybe when that 2.0 comes out, I can do an updated video. If you're interested, let me know down in the comments if you are interested in that. Or if you're interested in just maybe something on the EMEET Studio 2.0 software itself, maybe not the product, and seeing if it adds a lot of those additional features that we want. Let me know down in the comments. I'd be more than happy to do that, or I can just update a pinned comment, whatever you guys would prefer. Let me know down in the comments. The AI features are nice. The focusing does a really good job. The tracking, like we said, does a decent job of keeping us in there. It just is a little bit too choppy for me. And then the AI scripting tool, I personally won't be using it, but it is a cool feature to have there. It is something where you're getting access to some more premium style LLMs that you normally wouldn't have access to. So that's kind of cool as well. I am really curious at this point though, what you guys think about the EMEET Pixy when compared to the other cameras. If you've watched my other camera reviews, what do you think the EMEET Pixy might be missing? Do you think that the price point needs to be dropped a little bit? Let me know down in the comment section below. I'm sure EMEET's going to be reading all these comments as well. But with all that said, I really do hope you found this video helpful. And if not, I at least hope you found it interesting. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you can leave those down in the comment section below, and I'll try to get to them all as quickly as I can. Big thanks to my Patreon sponsors, and big thanks to you for watching to the end of this video. If you do want to see any other videos where I'm reviewing and checking out products, you can go ahead and check out the playlist right up here. And as always, stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.